Hello and welcome to this premium video. I'm delighted to be joined by John.
Hello.
Hello. Well, today John and I are going to be addressing the question that just refuses to die. The question of whether Marx was right. Rest assured, this is a trick question, sort of. Marx's philosophy of history, as I'm sure we're going to go into later, has more or less proven itself to be lacking in several areas. But we are genuinely going to be entertaining the possibility that had Marx been around in this day and age, he may not have had the woke views on things that many people positing themselves as Marxists seem to believe. In fact, there are plausible reasons to think that Marx may have regarded these self-posited Marxists as vulgar Marxists, perhaps even bourgeois apologists. And perhaps even by today's standards, well, having a Marxist view of the world probably might even qualify as being on the right or even the far right, depending on how far you want to peddle that illusion.
Yeah, and the claim that Marx would have been seen as a far rightist had he been around today,
Yes.
that must be pretty seismic for a lot of people. I remember when you made this claim to me, I was pretty skeptical. I thought, well, but then I thought about it a bit more, and it seems to me that most people view Marx either as a devil, if they're on the right, or as the Messiah, if they're on the left. He's one thing or another. He's like a mythical polar figure. And actually, he was neither. He was a human being who had a load of vaguely comprehensible theories, which are rather objectionable, and you could argue led to a lot of tragedy. But he was fundamentally a person who had ideas, and we're going to discuss his politics on the basis of those ideas.
Yes, absolutely. I think I can almost hear the laughter of our conservative viewer base. Like at the very suggestion that Marx could be interpreted as right wing or far right in any way, but we have to make sense of this. You have to think about what his view of the world would be at the moment, what his views on subjects such as immigration, financial crises, and what's ultimately peddling all of this. And he would of course still argue that this is all the result of capitalism, but he would actually point the finger, I think, more at the left for where it's actually falling short in pointing, I suppose, the finger at where these causes are than he would at the right for doing what the right ultimately does, basically claiming that capitalism is an ahistorical extension of human freedom and something that we must preserve.
Yeah, and I think seeing the unholy alliance, or actually rather not that unholy alliance, between the radical left nowadays, the intersectional left, and corporate interests or establishment interests, I think he would probably see the left as far more representative of an oppressive power structure than the right at this point.
Yeah, I mean, who do you think the revolutionary consciousness at this point would fall on? I mean, do you honestly think it would fall on those who were very much in bed with the elites, those who are doing everything that the media is telling them to do, not thinking critically? I mean, let's just
deliberately attacking the idea of thinking critically about these things.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue. I mean, Marx is working within the tradition of German idealism. He looked up to Hegel a lot, despite the fact that he completely subverted or attempted to subvert his philosophy. Really, he thought is if any, as with Hegel, is kind of everything to Marx. What encroaches on thought is autonomous forces of production being starved of going to their inevitable destination. And so he would very much see, I suppose, the left and its constant unification or with hegemonic structures that are unjustified as not a good sign of, shall we say, a budding sense of awareness for a new fair global order, which Marx wanted, but as something that actually is hijacking that cause.
So he would basically say, to summarise that the left is moving the world away from his utopia, not towards it.
And who is holding this to account? As in, who are those who are, for example, looking at the intentions of the World Economic Forum, perhaps looking at how COVID has been, well, that there are signs perhaps that the COVID restrictions have ends beyond COVID itself. Who, on what side of the political spectrum do you think is most effectively holding that to account?
That would be us, wouldn't it?
That would be us.
Yeah.
And I find it very, very hard to believe that Marx, especially given the history that Big Pharma has, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Marx would be turning the knife in at Big Pharma wherever he possibly could, not least because there is an explicit incentive from capitalism to create pandemics in perpetuity, if you are the leader of a pharmaceutical company, that is.
There is a financial incentive there. It's one of the strange things about pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, of course. That would immediately lead Marx to have been banned from YouTube, ostracized as a heretic on those grounds. But anyway, that's a very, very heavy dose of what is to example of what is to come. But so John, and I would of course encourage our viewers and listeners to engage in this thought experiment. I'd like to begin by encouraging everyone to envisage a scene. A scene featuring Marx attending an after-party at the Labour Party conference hosted by Momentum. All the most impassioned LGBT lobbyists are there, mermaids, Stonewall representatives, BLM advocates are there. How do you think Marx is going to fare at this party?
I think he's going to be back of the queue when it comes to speak.
Yes, if there is any platform for free speech.
He is a white man, and a straight white man.
A straight white man of that, yes.
Haven't we heard enough from straight white men at Labour?
I believe we have. So a slightly intoxicated Marx, probably so, because I believe he flirted with alcoholism, I believe. I mean, at least his appearance suggests
looking at him, yeah.
Yes. So a slightly intoxicated Marx says, how do you do, sir? And gets answered, I'm a woman. He tries someone else. Hello, madam. How do you do? How nice you look this evening. The woman answers, how dare you subjugate me to your normal standards of femininity? Then he tries someone else who happens to be a black gentleman. Hello, fellow comrade. How do you do? The comrade answers, fine. How's your privilege? Marx answers, my revolutionary consciousness has never been better, thanks. How is yours? By which point he's arrested for hate speech on the grounds of misgendering, mansplaining, and post-cultural fragility. Post-colonial fragility, I should probably say.
Oh, that's fabulous.
So that's probably, I mean, as cringe as that thought experiment probably was on my part, the point that I'm making is Marx's initial thoughts would be thinking, what is this narcissistic bourgeois tripe? And he would be absolutely right. This would very much be a party hosted, I imagine, by and for middle-class people with predominantly very utopian, bougie ideas about what a better internationalist world would amount to. And you can, of course, find areas in Marx's writings where he is very much he is, of course, in favour of bursting the fetters of nationhood, bursting the fetters of, I suppose, the emotional inheritance that people have in nation states and things like that.
No, Marx never wanted the bourgeois class to guide the revolution, as I understand it. He didn't want the bourgeois, the middle class, the upper class to adopt his ideas and like good shepherds lead the people of the world towards his utopia. No, he wanted a revolution to break the power structures which he viewed as holding the lower classes back. So he would not be very happy, I think, in this social environment. Yeah.
But what are the sorts of views of of those who would attend this party? I mean, are they those who are seriously committed to bursting the fetters of nationhood, who simply see, shall we say, the very idea of cultures within nation states as things that that ultimately have no intrinsic value? I mean, they would certainly have this view about, I don't know, the value that an English person would see in English heritage, and would probably go along with the genuinely Marxist argument that, look, this has all been built and produced off of the back of oppression and capitalist exploitation. And Marx, of course, would be on board with all of that. But there seems to be a double standard between how they treat that, for example, and how they treat other nations, other cultures, of which you could argue they fetishize to an enormous degree.
Absolutely. In denigrating the aesthetic of Britain and Britishness, they also fetishize the aesthetic of foreign cultures and minority cultures. Yeah, absolutely correct.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the Palestine case is a simple example.
Yeah. You see people going around wearing Arabic scarves and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Of course, the peddling of the idea constantly that diversity is unconditionally good, that uncontrolled levels of migration brings with it no consequences whatsoever. So the idea that any culture other than the one in which English people inherit is somehow an improvement to the nation. All of when you start entertaining these ideas, we become further and further withdrawn from where Marx actually was. He's not fetishizing any one culture. He's merely claiming that the proletariat or its potential is being constrained by these things.
I think you'd be particularly outraged at, when you mention the migration question, that this impacts most heavily on the working class, or the proletariat, and it is the capital class, as you would call it, who benefits from having this endless tap of free labour that they can turn on at will.
Yes. And the only legitimate antagonism are class antagonisms, which exist in the form of course, the bourgeoisie who own property and want to accumulate further property for their own ends, and those who do not, and those who are dependent on a wage contract to attain their means of subsistence. This is the huge difference. Anything such as, I don't know, gender inequality, racial inequality, or the value that people may kind of identify in particular nations other than England, where some migrants are coming from, are suboptimal things for Marx. And these are all antagonisms that naturally sort themselves out when the revolution, according to his worldview, of course, it isn't mine anymore at least, then there ceases to be any reason why there should be any conflicts which emerge in the future.
Right.
The proletarian dictatorship is the end of history, and it may of course Marx would not see this as a dictatorship. He would see this as, I suppose, the common man holding his rightfully holding his fellow man to account as the person who doesn't own property and is perfectly happy about the fact that he never owns property. And of course, this is something that the Great Reset likes to hijack.
You will own nothing and be happy. Not we will own nothing and be happy. You will own nothing. Interesting.
So to summarise this, Marx he's a post-racialist. He's not someone who fetishises race or race consciousness. He cares not for it at all, and very much sees things like white supremacy not as things that are antecedent to capitalism, but as outgrowths of capitalism. Racism is as a result of capital forces basically just deconstructing everything for the furtherance of chasing further capital, right? The only legitimate antagonisms are class antagonisms. This is not to say he would see sexism as something that doesn't exist, but something that would cease to be a problem upon, of course, the fall of capitalism. And I've no doubt that Marx would have continued to hate capitalism, you can be sure of that, and probably would hate it even more now, given what we're currently seeing. But it would be because of, I would say, more what the anti-capitalists have become. I mean, even my days as an active Marxist, watching liberal coverage of social justice warriors was extremely satisfying. But I actually was introduced to Karl. Well, thanks to YouTube's algorithm, I was introduced to Karl when I was actually in my most impassioned Marxist phase.
Right.
Everything that he was saying was music to my ears. And then I had not the faintest idea why he was attributing all of this to Marxism.
Right.
No, but it was, of course, I found out why. And there's more plausibility than I gave it at that point. But I had no idea why I suppose commentators, particularly of the liberal Enlightenment tradition, were attributing stuff such as campus activism and feminism to Marx. This all struck me as very kind of liberal bougie posturing, really. And if anything, the annexation of progressivism rather than...
Yeah, I think the common strand that people were drawing out of that was the sort of religious adherence to equity doctrines.
Yeah.
Equity doctrines were running along a different axis. They wanted to equalize along, for example, gender or race or these arbitrary metrics of oppression rather than class. But the strand that people identified and calling it Marxist was this pathological focus on equity. And let's of course have it right. Marx was very much interested in equity, but he put all of his balls in the basket of economic inequality, and passionately believed that everything no such problems would persist, because he believed that all social relations are downstream of economic relations.
Yes,
it's fair to say. So he thought if you equalize things economically, there will be no more inequities, because all inequities, according to Marx, stem from economic inequalities, which is ludicrous.
Yes.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So in Marx, sexual orientation doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter. Gender doesn't even matter. And I mean, there is a feminist dimension to Marx's philosophy, and areas where Marxism does indeed prop up feminism. And actually, I would argue is where feminism still has some plausibility even today. It's rooted in the division of labour, and this is of course everything that the intersectional side seems to be trying to subvert, really. Because if shall we say, you have a society built and sustained on entirely productive principles, right, then that's going to benefit the man always, because he has superior strength. He doesn't have to bear children. He's in a far better position to negotiate a wage contract in his favour.
Other things being equal, there are various things in
there are very, very various things. And at the time, of course, this was the in the time that Marx wrote Des Capital, we were very much in the peak of industrial capitalism.
Well, at that point, my understanding is that the family was it was the nuclear family, and it was a unit with three functions, you could say, socially. One function was to look after the young, the other function was to look after the old, and then the final function was to contribute to the economy. And so the contribution to the economy and politics and so on was generally the province of the man of the household, while the province of the home economics, looking after the children and the parents and the grandparents, would be the province of the wife. And what's happened is that since that atom has been split, my understanding is that both are now entirely focused on the productive aspect of things, and the care of children, the care of the old has been farmed off to the state via care homes, which we try not to talk about because they're a national embarrassment and national scandal across all of the West, and children who are increasingly spending more and more of their lives either being brought up by smartphones or raised in kindergarten schools and so on. And so I think that I think there is a very big contrast between the world that Marx was looking at in terms of the relations between the sexes and today.
Absolutely. But I guess what he would probably look at, and what he does actually kind of look at, in fact, is that you've got, if at the moment at his time of writing, we still very much had that, as you said, we had that nuclear family in place, and we're getting to the point where, well, labour conditions were so bad in effect, and wages were being pushed back so much that capitalism actually ended up encroaching on that, and actually ended up forcing, shall we say, women and children to go into work as well. And Marx actually makes the argument, I can't remember exactly where he makes this, that ultimately that capitalism has absolutely no intrinsic relation to things such as the family. Sure. It simply sets out to deconstruct everything that it can.
Well, it's a system, and as a system, you can think of it like science in one respect, in that there's no inherent morality in it. So there's nothing about an economic system that will value the home or the community.
No, it's entirely instrumental.
Right. So if that becomes overly empowered, then you can understand how it would erode home and the family.
So where do you think intersectionalism falls into this?
Oh, that's
because you have it would seem to me that you have intersectionalism, or the intersexual feminists claiming, of course, that all of these expectations that we have of women and men are entirely performative, or to put it another way, they have no intrinsic value. They're social constructs that are born out of, shall we say, mimesis, repetition. They have no roots in anything essential, and that, well, ultimately, there's no reason why a man and a woman can't, for example, be disposed to pursue exactly the same ends for themselves. This would seem to have an uncosy alliance. So if I had Marx's cap on right now, this has a very, very uncosy alliance with that instrumental rationality that comes with capitalism, does it not? Could you not say that this is actually a quintessential case of subverting a progressive idea?
So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying in this instance is that in the situation with the combination of the intersexual view on sex and the supremacy of the economy, or that Marx would call capitalism, when you combine those things, all people are basically reduced or liquidated down to single agents of economic productivity.
Yes, and persons of self-interest more explicitly.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.